today on the Linux Certification Virtual Summit, we have a very special guest here. We have Devin Acosta, who is a Red Hat certified engineer, and he has something special to tell you all as well. Devin, how are you? And welcome to the Linux Certification Virtual Summit.
I am good, and I'm happy to be here.
I am so happy to have you here as my guest today. So tell me, who is Devin?
Well, I grew up in the Chicagoland area, the Midwest, my whole life. Um, and when I started about freshman year in high school, I started to get into computers. I had a brother um, who named Greg who had a really, 286 computer back then. And I'd always go over to his house and watch him play on it. And so I just really got intrigued about computers and how they worked. And that's kind of where I kicked off my initial computer enthusiasm. And then I talked my dad into going to Radio Shack back in the day, where they actually used to sell computers.
Yeah.
And they had their own computer line at the time called the Tandy 1000 RLX. And so he bought me that. It was a 286 machine with 640 kilobytes of memory and a 20 megabyte hard drive. So at that time, right, that was great and exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Microsoft DOS was famous, and just before Windows 3.1.1 came out. And so I was just hacking with basic programming language and anything that I could find. And then on my 17th birthday, my brother Jeff surprised me and said, "Today we're going to go to Best Buy and buy whatever computer you want." And so obviously I was in disbelief because my brother had never bought me anything. And so for him to actually go out and spend $1,000 on something that I wasn't expected was a real treat. And so I think what instilled to me is my brothers at an early age saw the potential of what computers could do to me and for my career. And so I kind of feel blessed that, I didn't have no money, I didn't have no job back then. So that they actually, took that step forward and did those kind acts for me so that I could start learning and taking my career forward.
Wow.
And so, yeah. So, and then continuing, right, so I started then playing with Turbo Pascal, and this is where I'm going to, explain to you where Linux came into my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, right in this era, right, the internet was still very new, and bulletin board systems were the thing. And so, through the bulletin board system, I met other Turbo Pascal programmers, and this one guy, he's like, "Hey, there's this thing called Linux, and you should install it and start playing with it." So he nudged my curiosity, and that's when I started playing with Linux. I mean, the kernel was not even version 1.0 yet. It was still pretty in its infancy. And in fact, it was considered a hobby, right, of Linus. And so it really wasn't even seen as a real operating system, nor did Microsoft or OS2 Warp see it as a threat. And so that's where so when I kicked off my Linux, and so when I turned 18, I got tired of the cold
Mm-hmm.
Chicago winters, and I moved to Salt Lake City. And you wouldn't think that the Salt Lake would be much better in the winter, but it's definitely much better. And then that's where I started working at Hewlett Packard, or in Packard Bell, and I did technical support. Um, And this is actually kind of where my life gets really interesting because I then started to work for some ISPs around Salt Lake, right? Back then, this is, early, 2000s. Um, the internet was starting to, everyone was wanting a web page, right? And, if you didn't have a web page on, if a business didn't have a web page up, they were losing opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, um, I actually was working in an ISP one day and I went into my job and they're like, you don't work here anymore. You need to go to this address and you're now going to be a Linux administrator. I didn't ask them to do it. They didn't give me a choice. They just forced me. And so just being, a 19-year-old kid, I'm like, okay, I got in my car, drove down the street, and I'm thinking, I was like, oh, I knew nothing about, being a real administrator. I was thrown into this position, all this expectations, right? They're like, you got to make sure that we don't get hacked and
Mm-hmm.
we're secure and right. And so I was like really overwhelmed. At the same time, it became a blessing. And so that's when I started learning about PHP and started doing web design.
Wow, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, well, it gets really even more exciting. And in 2004, I went to go work at this company called Linux Networks. And in fact, when I look across my career from today all the way back to, 18, when I really started working in computers, this is probably like the second coolest job that I've ever had in my life. We would actually build supercomputers for NASA, the Army Research Lab, and a lot of government agencies. And the really cool thing about it was, when government would order, in my case, 1,024 node cluster, which happened to be for NASA, there was only one integration specialist assigned, and I was assigned to that project. And so, as a part of that project, I was responsible for getting it configured, getting it installed, doing all of the validation, and then getting it out the door. And what made it a really interesting situation is, in order for the government to accept a supercomputer, there's a 30-day acceptance period that these systems must undergo. And so for 30 days, we have to make every 1,024 nodes hit 100% CPU and just, push the power to its limits. And obviously, when you do stuff like that, you're going to have power supplies blow. You're going to have, motherboards go. RAM will possibly die. Hard drives will crash. And for 30 days, 24 by 7 by 365, we had to be at the building because within a failure, we had 1 hour to replace the failed component and get it back into operation. And if we didn't complete this in 30 days, we had to restart the clock and start all over again.
Wow.
So you can imagine when we're dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions that you want that 30 days to go the first 30 days, and you don't want it to turn into 60 days because the amount of money that we would have to pay to power that cluster was just astronomical.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was pretty cool. And then I wanted warmer weather, really this time. And so I moved, of course, where else to the hottest place in the desert of Phoenix, right? But at the time, there was a lot of jobs down here. Everyone that I knew up in Utah had talked about, Phoenix. And so I kept hearing this thing about Phoenix, Phoenix, Phoenix. And so I'm like, I got in my car, I drove down here, not thinking twice about it. And this is where I've been now for the last 12 years. Um, and so this is really where my certification and Red Hat really started to form. I started working for a fraud company called 41st Parameter. And the really neat thing about that was our technology did not rely on cookies. Mm. And at this time, Europe was going through their privacy laws where it was illegal for cookies to be used in a browser. Wow. And so a lot of technologies that were similar to ours relied on cookies and other technologies that made it difficult for them to apply to the European laws. But ours didn't require cookies. You could delete all the cookies and our technology would still work. And the cool thing is we would catch, sexual predators, and we would catch, terrorists actually, because when you actually think about all of the knowledge that there is in the metadata, mm-hmm. For instance, a use case I'll tell you about. So if you were to buy a plane ticket, say from here, from Phoenix to New York, but you're really trying to go to Syria, let's say, right? A smart hacker or terrorist would you wouldn't buy a straight ticket from Phoenix to Syria. That would look very obvious. And so what you would do you would buy one ticket to New York, another ticket to Europe, another ticket to Syria, and then eventually your end destination would be Syria, mm-hmm. right? So what our technology would do and what the airlines do is they tie all of those transactions together. So they can tell that you bought a ticket on this airline and a ticket on that airline, and the algorithms put it all together that really you're going from Phoenix to Syria. Mm. And so it's kind of scary when, you don't realize how much data is really being tracked. Mm-hmm. And not to get into the whole Snowden thing, but it's a lot of it is true, right? There's a lot of information that is, stored about us, whether we realize that it's happening or not. Yes. And so you just need to be conscious of that. So, that's where I became my Red Hat certified engineer, was at 41st Parameter. And one of the cool things that I'm going to, teach you about, and what I suggest to everyone that I work with that are either coworkers of mine or other people that I'm mentoring is, you have to continue your education every year, because in computers, just like laptops and phones, every 6 months there's a new model and there is a new technology, and it's very, very difficult to keep up with it if you're not keeping your skills up to date and you're constantly learning. And so the one thing I always tell everyone to do is, if you're applying for a new job, make it as a part of the agreement that when you accept the position, that they give you $5,000 a year towards your continuing education. And if the company tells you, well, we don't have a policy, then it becomes, I don't care that you don't have the policy for other people, but for me, you will have the policy. And if you're not going to fight for yourself, no one will. Mm-hmm. And that's the one thing that I've learned. So, if you're applying for somewhere and there's nothing in the job description that talks about continuing education, you really need to make it to the forefront. It needs to be a conversation you have before you accept the position, and you need to fight for it. And that's what I've done in every position I've done. If they won't agree to that, I don't accept the position, because they're not investing in you, then you don't need to invest in them. Mm-hmm.
That's great advice you're giving. And, for people coming into IT, they need to know that you are your top advocate. And continuing education is very important. As IT often changes, there's always something new happening, there's always new technology. So, thank you so much for providing that gem to everyone because it's,
Yeah,
it's important. Yeah.
yeah. And it's actually interesting, right? At Experian, I've flown all around the world, and I was a part of their integration team. So I would be flown to Japan, and I would spend 3 weeks in Japan integrating our fraud solution, and then I would fly to United Kingdom, and I would, and as I would go to these different countries, I would have talks with other people doing work similar to me, but in the other countries. And it's quite staggering that, like, for instance, in the United Kingdom, no one had hardly any training. Like, when I would tell them, oh, I'm doing one training class a year and I'm getting all these certifications, like, they were just flabbergasted because, in England specifically, I guess what is acceptable in the workplace is sometimes quite different than what as us Americans would deem acceptable.
Yeah.
And so it was sometimes we'd be talking over drinks, right? And I'd have to sometimes settle down the conversation because when I realized that they weren't even getting what I was getting, it was like, whoa. So obviously the expectations differ around the world, and so you just have to be conscious of that. But very interesting stuff.
Yeah. So can I just ask you a quick question? So you
Sure.
mentioned that once you became promoted as the lead Linux system engineer, you had the chance to travel around the world to Japan and England. So how was that experience overall? Being the lead Linux person and just going to these places and deploying some of their systems. How was that experience for you?
At first, when I heard Japan, I went to my boss and I'm like, there's no way I'm going to Asia. I have no interest in Asia. Like, when I looked at my list of countries I wanted to visit before I died, Asia was nowhere on that list. Right. And especially since we also do business in China, and you hear about the air pollution and all of those crazy things. So at first I was reluctant, and my boss kept saying, no, 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 you need to, go there. And so finally I gave in, and I'm like, okay, and the really bizarre thing is, to this date, Japan is my most favorite country that I've ever visited in my life so far. Like, I don't know if you've been to Japan, but
No.
it is serious. Like, I tell everyone, if you're like me and you're like, Asia's not on the list, like, ain't doing it. You need to make an exception for Japan. And I know, like, sometimes that always brings mixed emotions with, Pearl Harbor, and sometimes they feel like Japan is, communists in ways because the government is watching and their laws and whatnot. But I mean, it is an amazing country. I mean, I've never felt as safe anywhere in my life. I never once at 3 a.m. walking down random street, I never once feared for my life. It was the nicest people I've met. Everyone was a pleasure. No one speaks English, so no one's going to talk to you. And what's funny is whenever you go into a restaurant, it's only pictures. And you look at the picture and you're like, it looks like it's chicken. And it looks like that's noodles with some vegetables. And you don't really know. You just like, well, I'm going to have to go for it. And so, it's always a, guessing game what you're going to get on the plate. And especially if you're like me, I hate seafood. And it's a very seafood heavy place. And so I basically went vegetarian when I was in Japan. But I mean, business wise, though, it is interesting. Like Japanese have different customs of what's expected. So, for instance, when we went to Japan, it is a tradition in Japan that you must bring them a gift. So if you are, company A and you're going to meet a Japanese company B, you don't just show up without gifts. And so you have to figure out, well, what kind of gifts do they want? And so we would bring them, baseball caps and baseball jerseys, and they're really big into baseball. It's like I think Japan's just love baseball. But it was kind of cool though. In the same respect, you also get gifts. And so whenever you go to Japan, you're always, no, I'm going to get a gift and I'm giving them a gift. And then they also want you to show them the business card. And so it's weird. It's like there's a whole ceremony. The very first thing that you do when you go into a room is you meet every person and you hand them your business card and you bow down to them kind of, and they read your business card. And then it's kind of like this weird, so there's a lot of honor and there's like a lot of appreciation for each other. It's quite amazing.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Thank you for all of that insight. I learned something new today. I do enjoy gift giving, so I think I need to take a trip to Japan one day, actually.
Yeah. If you're going for business, you got to do the gifts. Like
Yes.
if you come without a gift, it's going to be no good for nobody.
Thank you for that. Okay, so after you were the lead Linux system engineer, what was next for you?
So Experian, right? I was at Experian for about 5 years. We were initially a startup company, and then halfway through, Experian came and acquired us. And then, so I had and I just kept doing certification after certification, right? And so my end goal was the Red Hat Certified Architect. And right, that was my goal. And for me, certifications are everything. And so, right, so I got an opportunity with a startup company that was so startup, they only had like 10 people. And in fact, their infrastructure was almost non-existent. And so it was an opportunity for me to say, well, everything that I learned about Red Hat and storage and networking and all the components, I was able to build an entire network from scratch, not having to inherit any bad configuration, not having to inherit a system I didn't want to deal with. I was able to wipe the slate clean and say, well, this is what we're using for the operating system, and this is what we're using for our identity management. And this is, so I literally built everything from the ground up.
Wow.
And so for that, and it's in most of your life, right, there's not a lot of opportunities that come to you where you can just wipe the slate clean. And so, right, you're always generally coming into some environment where, it's been Band-Aid and duct tape together. And then you're trying to take it from something that's kind of broken to something not so broken, right? And especially in Experian, right, over 8,000 employees in, I can't even remember, almost like 70-something countries. To make a global change is really difficult. And so all you could hope to do is make, little bits of change here and little bits of change there. And so that's the reason why they took the startup position.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Great. After you did Experion, what was next? Like, what are you doing now, rather?
So I'm still at the startup.
Okay.
It's going through some rough times, and it's the future is very uncertain, and so I have been chatting with companies. You always, even no matter how much certifications you have or how much experience you have, I think any real professional will tell you, you're always passively looking, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're always wanting to know what the market looks like, in case something happens, right? You never want to be caught where you're out of a job and then you're out of a job for 5 months and then to find that next thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, not saying that you should go and jump from job to job, but, you should always entertain opportunities when they arise. So, right now, I'm actually, ironically, talking to a few different companies. And I'm actually looking, in one of those paths, I'm actually looking to go to become a full-time instructor.
Oh.
So, I've done the, on call for almost 20 years now of, on call 24 by 7 by 365. In a lot of the companies I worked for,
Mm-hmm.
I was the only person. So I'm always on call every day, every hour, every holiday.
Mm-hmm.
Only in certain companies, I got lucky to where maybe I had a second or third person.
Mm-hmm.
So even a lot of companies that you would think, oh, they're going to have a huge team, they really don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of now trying to, as I, get older, and I'm now trying to kind of give back and take what I've learned over the years and help produce those next level of engineers and architects that will come to follow.
Perfect. I think that is wonderful with giving back. And when you do start to instruct for your Red Hat courses, please let me know so I can let our audience know as well. I'm sure there's a lot of folks that will love to be taught by you because I can tell by everything you've mentioned thus far that you have a true passion for this, for Linux and just engineering, and it's wonderful. And I also can sympathize with your story about being on shift and on call. I'm usually that person as well, so I truly understand. So,
Yeah.
what made you decide to become a Linux certified professional? You know.
Well, for me, it was always, I would say it's in my DNA,
Mhm.
right? You know, like any high school or college, right? You're wondering, what am I going to do with my life? Am I going to be a doctor? Am I going to be a salesperson? Right? And I never had to think about that because, for some reason, computers just came naturally to me. And, I think I'm a very analytical person.
Mhm.
And, for me, I would build like, nowadays it doesn't really make sense to build your computer anymore because they're just so cheap and, it's almost more hassle to do it than not. But back in the day, right, it was fun. You would go and, pick out the motherboard and pick out the hard drives and, am I going to do Intel? Am I going to do AMD?
Mhm.
Right. And so my whole thing has always been about how does this piece talk to that piece? And how is that happening? And, trying to make it work and trying to break it. And then trying, when I did break it, figure out, well, what did I do and how do I fix it? And so, in that respect, I love the troubleshooting aspect of, knowing how computers work and, there's still stuff, right, that still to, this day that I'm still like, wow, how does that happen? Like if we think about like all the radio active, frequencies that are
Mhm.
happening right now between cell phones and, just all the different signals. It's amazing if you think about what's all going through the air right now. And so, anyway, so also, right, I fell in the I was always that person that wasn't the typical person.
Mhm.
I didn't go to college
Mm.
initially, right? Everyone kept telling me, oh, you got to go to college to be somebody, to make some money. But I learned in computers that's not true.
Mhm.
And in fact, I also learned that colleges weren't teaching the skills that were necessary to even be in computers. And so what I quickly learned in my age was that experience mattered,
Mm-hmm.
but to validate that experience, certifications. And, you know, certifications to some people, right? Obviously, as you can see everything behind me,
Yeah.
um, in fact, I so often mistakenly get confused for a Red Hat employee. And so, for the record, I will mention I am no way affiliated with Red Hat. I don't work for them. They obviously love me and I love them. And so marketing is always so kind to send me propaganda. And so, I mean, I even got a fedora, not the original. They wouldn't give me the original.
Oh, okay.
I asked, but they wouldn't give me the fedora yet. Um, but right, so it just, for me, certifications was very important.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I went Red Hat specifically is if you look at my certifications, I have a lot. In fact, I
Mm-hmm.
joked with my friend the other day that I should apply to the Guinness Book of World Records to see if I possibly might have the most certifications. I don't know. I actually looked the other day to see if I could find, but I couldn't find anything in the Guinness Book of World Records yet that shows that that's a category that they watch. Except I might be afraid because I think there's a lot of youngsters today that are probably twice as fast and they have so many more options than I did. But going back to your question,
Mm-hmm.
right? Certifications are very, very important, especially the certifications that test your actual practical knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not talking about the question answers, fill in the blanks, multiple choice exams. Now, they obviously have place in the workplace, right? It's, definitely when you're starting out and you're new and you're only a year or two into your thing, right? Getting your Linux Plus or your Linux Certified Professional Institute Level 1 is definitely going to be the easier route. And
Mm-hmm.
it will help kind of build up your confidence and say, okay, I achieved this milestone. Now I can go. But Red Hat exams from the very beginning have always been hands-on.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question answers. There's no fill in the blanks. To take the exam, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So you can't even talk about what was on the exam
Mm-hmm.
specifically, right? So the exams have been held in such a high manner that, Red Hat, right? And people are going to say I'm biased, and I am.
Uh-oh.
I am maybe a little bit, but but the really cool thing is, in addition, right, Linux Foundation just in the last year, 2 years actually, their exams are all Red Hat based in the sense of it's all hands on, right? So for many people who are like, well, I'm an Ubuntu user and I don't want to go the Red Hat way, or the Red Hat way doesn't make sense for me, then the cool thing about the Linux Foundation, and I'm actually a big advocate for them, but they weren't able to get me some banners in time. So right now I'm showcasing Red Hat.
Okay.
Um, but they have a Linux certified systems administrator and they have the engineer. The cool thing about their exam is you can take it from home through the online where they watch you through a webcam. Right. Red Hat still makes you go into what they call a kiosk. So you can't do it from home.
Mm-hmm.
But there are kiosks in a lot of major cities. And so it's a lot easier. And I think that kind of goes into my next point I think we should talk about is, when I was doing this, over 10 years ago, it was very, very difficult to get, an architect was almost impossible,
Mm-hmm.
right? And, because to get an exam for Red Hat, you had to find a class that happened because the exams were only offered when they were doing training. Well, if you were looking for a certain training class, it would probably only happen 3 or 4 times a year. And of those 3 or 4 times a year, you would be lucky if 2 of them actually make it. Because if they don't have 6 people, then the class doesn't happen. And so, right, if you are trying to achieve the architect and you're like, I need this one exam to get there, but it never happens, then, becoming certified just becomes a nightmare, let alone flying there and hotel and car rental and food and, just all of the, anxiety that goes with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays it is so, so, so much easier. Red Hat and Linux Foundation and a lot of on Linux Academy, which I'm going to talk about. There's a lot of opportunity now where you can not even leave your house for very cheaply, get the knowledge you need, and you can do it in a lot shorter period of time than I did.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you. So, what were some of your study habits that you developed to help you prepare for the Red Hat Certified Engineer exam?
So so my method is, right. So what I always suggest to anyone, right, Red Hat's exams do come with some anxiety. And especially because the pass rate is very low, especially on the engineer. The administrator exam, and I don't know that there's actually officially numbers that are ever released, but the average that I tell most people, I think on the administrator, it's probably 60 to 70% of the people probably pass the first time.
Okay.
Engineer, not even half of them do. In fact, I've seen on the engineer exam, I had one guy who had taken it 3 times and he had failed all 3 times.
Wow.
And it's $600 an attempt, right? So, at $1,800 just down the drain, obviously not only frustration, right, but just a lot of emotions come with that. And so, right, my habit is, this is what I'll tell you to do, right? So if you take one of the cram courses, I call them the cram courses. It's basically any course, if you go to Red Hat site, where you pay about $4,000 for a 5-day course. It includes the exam. So basically, the first 4 days is like a cram session to try to pass on the 5th day. And again, if you're really smart and you learn quickly and you have photographic memory and you can do stuff well, you'll probably pass on that 5th day. Otherwise, you're probably going to go away not so happy.
Oh, wow.
So what I tell everyone to do is, when you're going through your textbooks, whether they're even the certification books you buy off of Amazon or the Red Hat course, do the lab. I say 3 times. So what I actually do is, if the book, let's say has 18 chapters, in Excel, in the column, I'll do chapter 1 through 18. And then in my column, I do attempt 1, attempt 2, and attempt 3.
Okay.
And I print out this matrix, and I have it always on the side of my computer. And it's my motivation. So when I have completed all 3 attempts for all the labs, and the checkboxes are all checked, then I tell myself I'm ready. Now, I'll tell you what I say qualifies if you can check the checkbox. Okay. So the first time you do it, you always give yourself a freebie. So if you end up having to cheat by looking at the book or Googling or whatever method you use to cheat, the first attempt, you still pass yourself. However, when you try for the second time, if you have to cheat at all at any time, you can't consider that lab done.
Wow.
And now what I tell you to do is move on to the next lab and see if you can do it, and then come back, because the more times you do the labs without cheating, the more it's going to be in your head, and you'll succeed. Now, there are a lot of new technologies today. So, right, I'm not just here to sell you on Red Hat, even though I'm gladly will do it for you. But LinuxAcademy.com, love them to death. Again, I'm not getting any commission from anybody. So whether you go there or not does not matter to me.
Mm-hmm.
But as I mentioned, it's right now. I think it's like $9 for the first month. They have plans that are monthly for $29 a month. If you pay quarterly, I think it's like $78 a month or for a quarter. And if you pay for the entire year for $229, you get access to every single course. I mean, they have
Wow.
everything from Red Hat to, Ansible to
Mm.
Puppet to Chef to OpenStack. I mean, there is no better place that I know of. If you are trying to do anything from learning MySQL to learning security,
Mm-hmm.
linuxacademy.com is your site. If your intent is, I want to be like Devin,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to be that geek, and I want to wear red and uh, pretend like I work for them, then the Red Hat has an amazing program. Um, so 2 years ago, they released a program called the Red Hat Online Learning Subscription. I was excited because, right, for the first time in my life, I no longer have to worry about, is this class happening in Denver? Is it going to happen? Is it going to cancel on me? Is my friends that live there going to be available to let me stay with them for free? Like, you don't have to worry about any of that anymore. So the basic edition, it's $5,500 is the list price. Now, obviously, with anything that's list price, based upon your company and your dealings with Red Hat, you can get that possibly for cheaper. But for $5,500, it gives you access to, I believe, over 30 Red Hat certification courses. They include all of the material that you would have gotten had you gone through the 5-day cram session. So you will have online videos where you will watch an instructor do the lab. You will have the reading materials and the workbooks to actually do the labs. They also provide you a virtual environment with the entire lab, servers and all the workstations. Everything is provided for you. You can destroy it and rebuild it with a few clicks. So you can acquire your architect, right? So I always laugh when I'm telling all my friends right now, like, I bet you there's a 19-year-old right now who probably doesn't have a job. He's a Linux geek. He could technically, possibly get his architect in 1 year if he just does the 7 exams back to back to back.
Wow.
So, right. So, but it's possible. Or he could even, for surely, get an engineer in less than a year. Right. It really comes down to how much time do I have, right? Obviously, if you have family and kids and friends and trying to have a social life, then that's all going to play into that equation. But that's why I always stress for anyone also on the path, you have to kind of force yourself. Like, I've had many times where, like, I'll do an exam and let's say it's like the SE Linux exam that I did a few years ago, right? And I tell myself, I'm gonna do this course in 2 months. But a month into it, I'm not even halfway through it, right? I clearly told myself, I'm gonna get to it tomorrow. And then tomorrow, I'll double up this weekend. I'll really just double up this weekend. And then next thing you know, you fooled yourself into thinking, I'm going to do it in 2 months. And 2 months turns into 4 months. And then you're mad at yourself because then you possibly forgot some of the stuff because you did it like 3 months ago. And so, whatever it is that mechanism, always force yourself to have a cadence. Whether you set a reminder on your phone saying, did you do an exam or a lesson today? Have some kind of, or even make a reward system to yourself. Like, that's what I do. So every time I pass an exam, I give myself $500 and I go buy whatever I want. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I need it, if it's wasteful or not, I say to myself, by passing that exam, this is the $500 I've given myself. And if I want to squander it, I can squander it. So give yourself a reward, give
Yeah.
yourself some motivation to do it.
I think that's great incentive. $500 to just do whatever you want. Love
Yeah.
it. Love
Yes.
it. And thank you for all of those great tips. Like, you're on the money, and I can see why you have so many certifications. You're really
Yeah, I have
those,
it.
yeah.
I have it. I think I call it. I have it down to a science,
Okay.
right? So it's my method is proven.
Mm-hmm.
I've proven it for the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I promise you. I know, and trust me. Every time I look at that spreadsheet and I see that I have to do everything 3 times, I'm just like anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you've done the lab and you're like, that was simple. I don't do it anyways. Like, right? Whenever you're on an exam, your anxiety is going to increase.
Mm-hmm.
And so, speaking on a few more tips I'll give you, right, is when you're in the exam, know what help that you have. Every exam has help, right?
Mm.
So, you have all of the Linux man pages available to you
Oh,
for every
wow.
command, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, don't forget the basics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you forgot what was that switch, do a man on the command
Mm-hmm.
or run the command -H, right? In addition, remember on the file system, there's a lot of documents under user share doc. And in the exam, you're going to have a GUI. You're going to have a web browser. Point your web browser to user share doc because most of those documents are in HTML.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only do you have the man pages, you have the documents that are under the user shared doc location. And in addition, a lot of the times you just need to read Red Hat in Red Hat's exam specifically, when it gives you all the instructions on what tasks you need to complete, generally there are a few documents that are referenced.
Mm.
Don't forget that those documents exist and those documents may help you. Now, again, if you're on the exam, though, and all your time is spent scanning a document, you're probably not going to pass the exam
Mm-hmm.
because you're limited. But if it's something like you know it, and oh, it was in that document somewhere, right? That could be a lifesaver, right? If that
Yeah.
makes you pass that one task when you never would have passed it, just, remember that you do have help available and to use it.
Wow, that's wonderful. So it's also key to read the instructions because it may just
Yeah,
help you. Yeah.
and in fact, I failed one Red Hat exam, right? I've only failed one in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, that I'm very hard on myself. I have really high expectations,
Mm-hmm.
and I probably am my own worst nightmare, right? And so maybe my methods may seem a little over the top, but that's because I push myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it works for me, it should work for you. Um, and so, you know, just remember that. I'm trying to remember if there was another point that I was going to make
Okay.
there. Um, any other questions for me?
Yeah, so besides Linux Academy that you mentioned that everyone should use with learning Red Hat and just Linux in general, were there any other specific resources that you used to help you study for your Red Hat certified engineer exam?
Yeah, so there are books. I think now I haven't personally used Linux Academy to get my engineer.
Oh, okay.
I had it
Okay.
already,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you go on there, they have like a forum where you can talk everyone. I want to say that over 90% of the people that have talked about passing the exam only using Linux Academy's material have passed.
Okay.
Now, right, there's also books here, right? So this is just an example. When I was at Experian, I taught classes. In fact, I taught the Red Hat Certified Systems Administrator class twice during my tenure, right? And so every time I teach the class, I teach from a different book. So I'm not here to sell you this one book over another book, right? Every book has a different writing style. And so some people might like one author's style versus another. The thing that I will say is use labs. So you're going, like some of the books actually have a DVD, and I know DVDs are old, and so many people may not have DVDs anymore. But now you can actually use Amazon. So if you go to Amazon's web services, even if you already had an account, you can create a new account, and it will give you 1 year of free VMs up to 1,000 hours.
Wow.
So when you spin up the instance in Amazon, it will tell you whether the instance that you're spinning up is free or not. And so, right, you don't really need like 4 gig of RAM for a lot of your practice exams, right? You can do the free tier, and most of the labs will work. So whether you're using, so I encourage you to, if you rather have VMs on your local machine, get VirtualBox if you want it for free. If you're a VMware person, go download VMware Fusion or Workstation. If you're like me, I'm a Parallels guy. I use Parallels for my virtualization. But you're going to need some lab, right? Mm-hmm. So, but again, Linux Academy, I do know they offer labs. I would even tempt you, don't just do the labs that they give you. Mm-hmm. Spin up your own, right? Take yourself outside of the box, and do something that might not be comfortable, right? Mm-hmm. Learn, how to use Amazon, and it's definitely a skill that's out there and highly sought after as well.
I can say, when you just said, to have your own lab and learn by just doing and kind of take a step away from, say, like the Linux Academy labs, doing that for myself is the best way that I've actually learned how to use Linux, like going in there and breaking stuff and figuring out how to make it work again. It really, it gives you confidence.
Yeah, I'm a hands-on person, right? Yeah. So usually if I can watch someone do it, mm-hmm. but right, usually when I teach people, like when I would go to Japan, they would always want to just push the keyboard to me, right? Mm-hmm. But I would not let them ever let me type, because forcing them to type makes them mentally think about it, and it makes them learn. And my motto is, you have to do it to learn, right? Mm-hmm. So, labs are your key, right? And there's even a lot of OpenStack, right? There's a lot of services like Amazon, that have OpenStack where you can spin up a lot of VMs really quickly. Where if you want to spin up 5 VMs, right? Mm-hmm. You want a mail server, you want a web server, you need an NFS server to share file systems between the servers, right? Mm-hmm. So set up yourself a lab, right? And even if it ends up costing you $5 or $10 a month, mm-hmm. right? You really just need to invest in yourself. Yes. And, right, if you don't invest in yourself, then who will?
I agree. So can you kind of explain a little bit more of what OpenStack is? I know you've mentioned it a little bit in the context, but is it like, say, a already made lab for folks to use? Like,
so OpenStack is my passion. In fact, it's where my career is all I want it to be. So when we look at the progression of computers, right, we went from bare metal, where we would install operating systems directly on the hardware. Mm-hmm. Then virtualization came along and said, well, we can have like a hypervisor, which we install on the machine, but then all the virtual machines, which are just emulated computers, right, mm-hmm. that then run on the server. right? Because no one, installing on bare metal is never fun, especially if the server crashes and then you have to go do a reinstall, and it became a nightmare. So what OpenStack does is it took virtualization to the next level. And in fact, the common analogy that everyone used, and OpenStack probably hates when people say it, but it was started by Rackspace and NASA to mimic basically Amazon Web Services.
Oh.
And so what it does, right? So, right, if you have 3 servers, typically in a data center, right, and if before you had one was a mail server and one was a web server and one was a database server, you would have a lot of wasted resources, right? Your mail server probably was never maxing out the CPU, right? Your web server may or may not even been doing much, right? Your database server probably was doing most of the work. So what OpenStack solves is it lets you utilize your hardware to the best of its ability.
Wow.
And so it basically adds, right, and I'm sure you heard, there's a lot of terms that are used today: software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, right? So the cool thing is what makes OpenStack beautiful. So if you only have one box, let's say you have a box at home, let's say it's got even 32 gig of RAM, maybe not much, and it's got like a terabyte of hard drive. With OpenStack, you can install it on one node. It then gives you a web interface that's fully automated. So the cool thing about OpenStack is it has to be automated out the door. So the minute OpenStack says, congratulations, you're now configured, you log into a web portal and you can import, CentOS images, you can import Ubuntu images, you can SUSE, whatever your distro, Windows, it could be whatever, FreeBSD if you're into Unix. But the cool thing is the functionality that you would have in Amazon, you would have that same functionality on your little server.
Wow.
You can create virtual networks. You can create virtual machines. You can create machines behind firewalls. And so you can basically mimic an entire data center on a single server.
Wow. That's phenomenal.
Right? And in fact, that's where the market is going, right?
Yeah.
So OpenStack is a very, very hot topic. What makes it, I think, difficult in the beginning, right? It's been around now for, I believe, just under 7 years, but it's probably only been in the last 2 years that I would say that the train has really started to pick up steam, is because OpenStack has an upgrade every 6 months. And for some companies, right, that's a really fast and aggressive life cycle, right? And it's so, there's a release that's October 6th is the next release.
Oh, wow.
The release after that is going to be in April. So every 6 months there's a new version, and it's like you're constantly, just like computers or phones, right? You're constantly chasing that new version.
Yes.
And so I think that's what's made it difficult. And right, it was opened up to the community. So there's like 3,000 or 4,000 developers all around the world contributing. It's been open sourced, right? And as we learned with anything open source, the minute you open source it's like the movement just makes it move. And so I highly recommend, I'm not usually one to do summits. Right? Whenever a company would give me money, they would be like, you want to go to a summit or do you want to do training? Right? And of course, I always said, well, I want the training. But I went to my very first OpenStack summit in Austin this year. And it was amazing. I mean, I met people from Brazil and all over the world, and just all these brilliant minds coming together for one purpose. It's really beautiful to see. And I think there was over, I want to say 8,000 people that attended the summit. So it was it literally shut down blocks in Austin.
Wow.
It's an I say if you want to go to Summit and you are like, what is this OpenStack thing that he's talking about?
Mm-hmm.
If you can get your work to send you in October to Barcelona, then by all means. Unfortunately, I couldn't go to Barcelona, but the next one is going to be in Boston
Okay.
in April. So if Boston in April sound exciting to you, then maybe check out the OpenStack Summit.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was great knowledge. I learned something new today, and it's exciting. So this leads me to another question for you. So
Mhm.
where do you see Linux in 5 years? What do you see?
Right. So right now, right. The hot word today is containers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And even with OpenStack, right? Because OpenStack is actually around virtual machines, right? It's at the it uses KVM, kernel virtual machine, which was what Red Hat many years ago said this is going to be our hypervisor. And a lot of people in the industry said, "Oh, that's a bad decision." They thought Red Hat was crazy, um, but Red Hat stuck to their guns, and now KVM, I think, is very mature. So it's actually going toe to toe right now with VMware,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been keeping VMware on their feet. Um, but OpenStack focuses right now on virtual machines. And so Google, being who Google is,
Mm-hmm.
um, they released a really neat project called Kubernetes. And for anyone who doesn't know what Kubernetes is, it's basically Google for everybody. That's the motto. So if you think about, and I don't know that even Google releases the number of servers and data centers, but it's a massive amount. Um, but right, and with having an infrastructure as big as Google, you can imagine that managing those servers are a nightmare.
Yes.
Uh, just with because you know Google's never going to want to have where you search for something and it doesn't respond,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's obviously the world's most popular search engine at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so managing that was a nightmare. And so Google had to face a lot of challenges and they had to create their own solutions to problems because other companies either weren't at that scale or didn't have those problems. And so Google took what they did internally and says, we're going to give this back to the world. And so Kubernetes is Google for everybody. And where Kubernetes is amazing. And I think Kubernetes, if you even search for Kubernetes and Docker and containers, like it's going to be like at the top of the list. And so, right, VMware or VMs solve the problem of physical machines. But now there's even some applications that say, well, VMs are even bloated.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we need a whole operating system if all we're running is Apache or Tomcat? We don't need all those other processes and we don't need all that extra overhead. So containers is the idea that you don't need a full-blown operating system of it, and it requires less resources. But even with that, that becomes a nightmare to manage. And so what Kubernetes does, and even Docker and Mesosphere and Docker Swarm, um, is it lets you manage your containers. The really amazing thing, Tiffany, is that
Uh-huh.
uh, Kubernetes runs on top of OpenStack.
Oh
So
wow.
you get the best of both worlds. So in fact, there's a lot of movement. So you can do virtual machines and containers side by side, mixed together, all on a single platform. And
Wow.
I think that is amazing.
Yeah.
I think Docker is big. I think containers will continue. The funny thing though is containers have been around for a long time, and it's not a new idea. And in fact, to many people it is new because they're hearing it for the first time. But the idea of containers have been around for a long time, but it just never, for whatever reason, catched on at that time. And now it's kind of like it's got its moment, and it's where it's moving. So I think we're going to see a lot of virtual machines go to containerizations, and we're going to be more focused on the app and not so much on the operating system.
Yes.
Right? We're going to be like, we need the web server to be up, but whether it's Ubuntu, whether it's Red Hat, whether it's whatever, that doesn't matter. All that matters is my web server is up, my mail server is accepting mail, whatever it is that service. So I think we're going to see a shift in IT where we'll be focused less on the hardware and more on the software.
Yes, yes, I agree. And one of my instructors for a recent boot camp I went to said the same things you said. So it's happening. It's
Yeah,
happening.
and I actually encourage like a lot of admins I know, they're hardcore admins, right?
Hmm.
They don't do web programming. In fact, some of them that I know, they don't even want to do scripting, like shell
Oh
scripting,
wow, I love
right?
shell
And
scripting.
yeah,
Yeah.
and even that, like shell scripting. And so I think that's like one of the final things I kind of want to really mention during this thing is I think for anyone, right, computers is a blessing and a curse, right?
Hmm.
With it's going to come long hours. You're not going to have your 8 to 5 job. So for many people who are looking for 8 to 5, maybe computer administration may not be the thing for you.
Hmm.
But the beauty in computers is, especially in Linux and just all of it, it's the only career that I know where you can start out as a Linux admin. You can then go into security.
Hmm.
You can become a database administrator. You could do DevOps and maybe do automation.
Hmm.
So you don't even have to stay on the path. So your path can just crisscross and keep crisscrossing. And so if you find like, I've been doing databases for 5 years and you know what, I'm over databases, it's no longer exciting, you can really change your life.
Yes.
And for a lot of other careers, it's probably not so easy or, just to get up and do something different.
I agree. There's a lot of flexibility with being in IT, especially when you know Linux. I can
Yeah.
attest to that. Yeah.
So, so the only other thing I'm going to say for any Linux admin, you need to know a programming language. So
Yes.
whether it's Ruby, whether it's a Python, all my friends make fun of me because right now I'm actually doing OCaml.
Okay.
Um, again, I had the same response as you. I actually went to my second conference that I've only been in my entire life. I'm breaking the rules this year, if you will. So I went to O'Reilly's OSCon, which happened to be in Austin once again. So I got to go to Austin 2 months in a row. But they had like the TED Talks there. And there was this lady named Gina.
Hmm.
And right, I'm there with my old coworker from Experian. I managed to convince him that he needed to go to this conference with me so we could, catch up and have drinks and kind of just enjoy each other, but at the same time learn. And we actually went there for the Google Kubernetes 2-day training. So Google does offer training for Kubernetes for those who
Sweet.
want to know. But we're at OSCon and we're looking at this TED Talk at OSCon, and this lady gets up there. I don't know who she is. I'm like tired. It's already about 6 o'clock in the evening. I've been there all day. We decided that because we like the idea of TED Talks, that we would endure about an hour of them. And so I'm sitting there and I'm watching this TED Talk, and this really interesting lady got up there, and she started talking about this thing called OCaml. And I turned to my coworker and I'm like, OCaml, what the heck is that? Like, and I find out it's a programming language that has was started created back like in the early 70s.
Wow.
And it goes back to like when scientists were we're trying to figure out like all of these, mathematical equations and probabilities and all of that craziness, which when I get into that kind of math, my brain starts to shut down. But anyway, so this lady, um, I'll send you the info because you should link to her. She is amazing.
Okay.
Unfortunately, her TED Talk, um, it was supposed to be recorded. It was the most, she excited me so much. I had never in my life had watched one lady talk about something I didn't even know what it existed. But by the time she was done speaking, I was so excited about something I didn't even know what I was excited about. Because there's a game called Gwent or something like that, and but OCaml is a functional language, and I won't divert here. But anyway, so I'm in an OCaml class that just started yesterday. So for those of you who are watching, you can still join. Just search for OCaml online training. It's out of a French university. I can't even say it, but it is in English. It is recordings and videos and labs. But again, it's if you're used to Ruby or Python, it's very, very different. So it's going to really throw you for a loop. And I'm still trying to put my head around it because it's a different style of programming. But, again, here's something you never thought you'd hear me say today. Yeah. My friends make fun of me because every other week we're in a chat channel at Slack. And I just send pictures of camels. And they know that I'm talking about OCaml. So I don't even know why I'm excited about it, but, check it out. It might be for you.
Phenomenal. Can you give the website again for it?
So I'll have to give you let me, for the OCaml.
Yeah.
I have a mechanical keyboard. That's how diehard I am.
Okay.
So if you do a search, the website is www.fun, like having fun, FUN, -MOOC.FR for France.
Okay.
And then it gets really crazy, but that's the main website. So if you go to that website, do a search for Introduction to Functional Programming in OCaml. Now, I'll warn you, the instructors for OCaml, they're older guys. Mm-hmm. They look like scientists. So it's not going to surprise you that you've not heard of this language. However, I also encourage you, I'll send you the details so you can put it on the site.
Okay.
I stalked Gina. In fact, it's a true story and you can ask her. I actually didn't even get to meet her at the conference, but I knew her. So I LinkedIn her, and then I actually created a Twitter account when in all my years, I told myself, I'm not doing Twitter. I'm not doing it. I joined Twitter just to follow Gina. So I'll send you Gina. Okay. She actually has a podcast where you'll hear, she is a fanatic. Like, I think like what I am to Red Hat, she is to OCaml. Like, if you just listen to her podcast, she will get you excited about this thing, and you won't even know why you're excited. So,
perfect.
I think her name is Gina Marie.
Okay. Gina Marie. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. So, Devin, what motivated you to become a Red Hat architect?
So, for me, right, my whole life's been about progression. And so the Red Hat Architect is the top of Red Hat's pyramid tree. It is the highest achievement that you can obtain in the Red Hat realm of certifications. And so I look at an architect in the same way that I look at it for people who design houses. In fact, I have friends that are architects that are actually designing buildings and making sure that, the structure can support the weight and all of that craziness. So it's actually funny, but I consider myself along that same lines. So let me tell you what an architect means in the Red Hat world.
Okay.
So in order to obtain a Red Hat architect certification, You have to have an active Red Hat certified engineer. So that means you had to have to pass those 2 exams.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, you have to pass 5 more exams. Where it gets even more fun is all of those 5 exams have to be less than 3 years old at the same time, right? So um, it ensures, so Red Hat, so let me make sure that everyone understands. So you do your Red Hat Certified Administrator, you do your engineer,
Mm-hmm.
and let's say you did that in 6 months. So that's when the clock starts ticking. Then, if it take, you have to do 5 more exams, whether that's in 2 years, whether that's in, it has to be under 3 years. So you need to take 5 more exams under 3 years to get an architect.
Wow.
And you have to continue to take what I tell everyone, 2 more exams every year for the rest of your life. Because at any time, because every exam that you take, they expire after 3 years. So for every exam, if any one of those falls off the list of 5 active, you lose your architect. So in Red Hat's realm, it means that people who are certified and active, they are keeping up with their education because they are taking 5 exams every 3 years. And those exams are, of course, are going to be classes that are new every time.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not just retaking the administrator exam. They're not just retaking the engineer. And the beauty about Red Hat is they give you paths. So like if you want to be an architect in cloud, you could get that. If you want to be an architect in data center, you can get that. If you want to be an architect in DevOps, you can get that. Or you can do what I do, just general. You can say, well, I don't really want everything in the cloud path, and I don't want everything in the DevOps path. You can pick and choose your 5 classes. You'll still get an architect. It won't say, like emphasis in cloud or emphasis in DevOps. But if you want those, then you have to take those exams that fall under that category. But if you just want the architect title, then you need to have 5 current exams in addition to the engineer being active. The cool thing, though, is every time you take, so for anyone who, so let's say you just want to get a Red Hat certified engineer,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all that you care about. The only requirement to keep your engineer current is to take 1 exam every 3 years. So you can see that the requirements are much more loose. Mm-hmm. It's not as difficult to achieve. So I can't release it, right? But if you look at the number of architects in the world, the number is much smaller than, say, the engineers of the world. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, what this whole thing about me and you talking together, right, mm-hmm. is when we're looking to get our next job, and we're applying for a position that maybe they're going to get 10, maybe there's 10 candidates, maybe there's 20. Well, what's going to make you stand out from the herd, mm-hmm. right? And if you don't have a lot of experience, then I think certifications will help. Obviously, you're going to be at the top of the list. You just are. So for me, as I tell everyone, I've reached Mount Everest. And so now now my friend actually, I'll mention it. He's like, well, now it's time to get your Microsoft certified engineer. Oh. And I'm like, I'll die happy without ever obtaining that. So in one respect, it also is a fear, right? Because now I've reached the top.
Yeah.
But for me, now I can dabble in OCaml. Mm-hmm. I can look at, there's always going to be something, whether it's containers or, in 5 years, whatever that new buzzword's going to be. But that's why. So for me, it's just showing, it's all about making, at the end of the day for me, if it doesn't help my resume,
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably not doing it.
Ah, I hear it. I hear it. So, what are some blogs and reading material, RSS feeds that you read that keeps you,
Yes.
occupied? Because you said you read Mount Everett. So, how do you keep your brain and Linux tech? How do you keep yourself technical, rather?
So I actually use Flipboard.com. And in
Okay.
fact, they have an iOS app, they have an Android app. And everyone I know that's watching, they're probably on their phone more than they are anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So what Flipboard is it's basically like news that is catered to you. So when you sign up to Flipboard, they have thousands of categories. So you can go in there and say any article that's on Linux, that's on shell programming, that's on OpenStack, that's on VMware. I mean, literally, you just start typing in words. So, if your hobbies are Ruby and web development and Linux, you just start typing those words in, and literally every hour, articles are just coming in and coming in. And so every night before bed, and I know against people who have a hard time sleeping, this is probably bad advice,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm sitting in my bed, flipping through Flipboard, looking at all my Linux articles that came in. I also use
Mm-hmm.
Slashdot.org. Slashdot, obviously, old school. Um, as you know, Red Hat. I'm a member of all of Red Hat's. You can go to their sites, and they have where they every month they send out like what's going on in the Linux world. I mean, there's a lot of them. OpenStack has the same. Um, but I mean, but Flipboard, it does everything. Like if you want to get into meditation, there's meditation stuff.
Wow.
If you're into cooking, so Flipboard is not just it's anything in your life. It could be, I mean, and the cool thing is it mixes your articles up. So you could be looking at a computer article, and then the next thing you're reading a running article, and then you're reading why you can't sleep at night. So so for me, I mean, but Flipboard is very relevant because it's almost like an aggregator of all these different sites. So for me, it saves me the time of having to bounce everywhere. So,
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you
well,
for that.
yes, I appreciate your time. Sorry for those that are watching. They probably maybe didn't care about OCaml or Japan, but or any of the things that I mentioned. But it's been a pleasure.
Yes.
Um, and I'll make sure to follow up with you with Gina's podcast
Yes.
and other things. Anyways,
Exactly.
it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Devin. It has been a true pleasure. Thanks.
All right.